What I'd like to talk to you tonight about is about the progressive elite in America, particularly those that want to become president of the United States or want to determine the future course of the country. They get a lot of media attention, they get a lot of rave reviews on college campuses, but I'm going to encourage you today to follow the money and to think about them in a new way. Not to think of them as political figures with revolutionary ideas. I want you to think of them as grifters and of people that are not of serious notes, that are cynical, that are hypocritical, and don't often really believe what they actually say. There are some good political figures in Washington, D.C., but I think a lot of them fit the profile as the way that Mark Twain once explained it when he said that a lot of politicians are like diapers. They need to be changed often for the same reason. So let's begin by looking at some of these people that you hear about on college campus all the time, that you see on national television, are espousing these wonderful progressive ideas. Let's begin with Bernie Sanders. Anybody in the crowd have a friend who loves Bernie Sanders? Exactly. Love Bernie Sanders. And what you hear about Bernie Sanders all the time is Bernie Sanders is genuine. And Bernie Sanders is all about the cause, he's about the little guy, and he's the true believer. And that's what people say they love about Bernie Sanders. Well, let's just walk through Bernie Sanders' career, and you can sort of decide for yourself, beginning with his career before he became mayor of Burlington, Vermont in 1980. Up until that point, Bernie Sanders, by his own admission, never really held a regular job. Now, why did he never really hold a regular job? Well, his friends that were with him at the time said that he considered those jobs moron jobs. They were jobs that were beneath him. It was not something he felt that he had to do and should be required to do. And of course, what this meant is that oftentimes Bernie Sanders ran out of money. So how did Bernie Sanders cope? Well, one of the ways he coped, according to his friends, by the way, these are from his friends, not from his enemies. One of the ways he coped is when the utility was shut off on his apartment in Burlington, Vermont. What did he do? There was a sweet old lady that lived below him that was deaf. She was old, she lived alone. What did Bernie Sanders do? He ran the extension cord down from his apartment through the window and tapped into her electric grid. That's what Bernie Sanders did. When Bernie Sanders did anything in the 1970s, it was run for the U.S. Senate as member of a small minority party called the Liberty Union Party. Now, again, running for office requires money. What did Bernie Sanders do? Bernie Sanders ran for the U.S. Senate and collected unemployment insurance at the same time. Now, Bernie's big break came when he was elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, with about 300 vote majority. Had he not won the Burlington mayor race, we probably never would have heard of Bernie Sanders again. But this transformed Bernie Sanders' life in a couple of ways. First of all, it gave him power for the first time. What did Bernie Sanders do with the power that he had? Well, one of the first acts that he took as mayor of this town in Vermont was he hired his then girlfriend, later wife Jane Sanders, and put her on the city payroll. The city council said, wait a minute, you can't do that. There's no job that she's actually filling. You can't just start handing out money to your girlfriend. Bernie Sanders ignored them, and she stayed on the payroll. When Bernie Sanders moved to Congress and was elected to Congress in the early 1990s, he learned one of the great secrets of how to legitimately, although corruptly, channel money to your family from your political campaign without even knowing. It's called media buying. Now, a lot of you are familiar with the fact that political campaigns buy television ads and they buy radio ads, and they spend a lot of money doing this. What a lot of people don't realize is that the way the business works, if you hire a media buyer can and often will take a commission on that. So if I were running for the U.S. Senate and I hired you as my media buyer and I said spend $1 million on radio or television ads, you would take anywhere between 10 and 15% of that, or 100,000 or 150,000 of that, and that would be your money. And the beauty of this arrangement is it's not actually disclosed who gets the commission for the media buy. Do you follow? Now, Bernie Sanders runs for Congress, starts doing media buys. Who does Bernie Sanders put in charge of his media buying? His wife. And his wife has no background in media buying. She has never done media buying before in her life. But this is an opportunity for him to channel hundreds of thousands of dollars to his wife through his campaign funds. This becomes a massive amount of money when he runs for president in 2016, because for the 2016 campaign, he spends an astonishing $83 million in media buys. $83 million. The commission on that is what, $12 million. Now, who got that money? We don't actually quite know, but there are a few clues. Here's what we know. We know that that $83 million was channeled through a company called Old Town Media that had no website, that had no other clients, and the business was literally registered and operated out of a home on a cul-de-sac in suburban Virginia. And when you look at who owns Old Town Media, you find out that it's two friends of Jane Sanders who were doing media buys with her back when Bernie was running for Congress. Now, a progressive reporter actually asked Jane Sanders about this, about Old Town Media, about who was doing the media buys. Was she involved? What did Jane Sanders do? She hung up the phone. Look at the wealth that Bernie Sanders has today. A lot of it comes from book writing. One of the few ways left, really the only way left, a U.S. senator can earn extra income is by writing books. They can't give paid speeches. They can't do consulting work. It's one of the few ways they can actually make extra money. So what does Bernie Sanders do? He writes a lot of books. Nothing wrong with that. I write books. But here's the difference. What does Bernie Sanders do? Bernie Sanders actually has his own political campaigns buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of his own books. You see how this works? And when you look at the work that Bernie Sanders has done in the U.S. Senate and the House from 1990 up until the present, you realize he's written more books in the last 5 years than he's actually passed legislation since 1990. He's passed 3 pieces of legislation. One was a centennial celebration for Vermont. The other one was to name a post office. And the third one was some obscure agricultural bill. But do you see what's going on here? Bernie Sanders today, a self-professed socialist, owns 3 homes. He's worth millions of dollars. And if you look at his rhetoric, it's interesting to see how it's changed. Beginning in the 1970s, up until 2016, Bernie Sanders had a very typical phrase that he always used, and I wish I could do a Bernie Sanders impersonation, but sadly I can't. But what he would rail against is the fact that our politics is dominated by billionaires and millionaires. And he said that beginning in 1975 up until 2016. What happened in 2016? He dropped the millionaire part because he became one. So you see how this works? The point is that Bernie Sanders is interested in building wealth for himself and for his family, and much of what he is doing politically is really a political racket.